Hi everyone, it's Kelly. I hope you're having a lovely day. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be doing some painting and I'm going to be sharing a quick story time. This story time will be about how eating and drinking became my own worst nightmare and how I almost lost my life due to a dumb hospital mistake. I am doing this video as September is Achalasia Awareness Month, which is the illness that I have, and I thought for this month's raising awareness I would make a video sharing my story. I just hope this video helps to raise just even a little bit more awareness, because most people don't know what this illness is. Also, just to apologise in advance, I have got a bit of a cold. I do sound a little bit sniffly. As you can see, this video will also show how I turned my most recent Achalasia sketch into a painting. I've done the digital versions of this art in the past, but I just wanted to do something traditional for this video. And just a quick warning, I will be covering topics that may be triggering for some people, so please don't watch this video if you find medical stuff a little bit triggering. So I went ahead, scanned my drawing, made it a bit bigger and then traced it onto watercolour paper, and then I painted it. And as you can see, I did do one attempt before this main piece and it went wrong, so this piece was my second attempt. So I hope you enjoy this video. Now I will begin to tell you the story of how food and water became my own worst nightmare. It all began during my teen years. I was struggling to swallow my food every so often, and as I got older it slowly got worse. By the time I was turning 17, things rapidly got downhill. I quickly went from just struggling to swallow solid foods to being unable to swallow soft foods and then even liquids. Obviously this concerned me, so I kept going to my doctors, and for a long time the doctors said I was just bulimic and also tried me on anti-sickness medications. After a long time of being ignored and being told that it was all just in my head, I finally snapped and I demanded to see a gastro specialist at the hospital. Time went by and I was finally sent to the specialist. They told me that they had already known what was wrong with me and they could kind of figure it out, but they needed to get proof of what it was by doing different tests, and then they would be able to give me a definite diagnosis. It was quickly arranged for me to have 3 different tests. Firstly, I had an endoscopy. This is where a camera is sent down the esophagus and they can basically have a look what's going on. However, this failed as I had food from days before still stuck in my esophagus, so another endoscopy was quickly arranged. After the second endoscopy, I had to go for a manometry test. This is where a thin tube was pushed up my nose and down my throat and down into my stomach. This test was to see what happens when I try to swallow and to read my pH levels. And finally, last of all, I had to have a barium swallow test. For this I had to swallow a really thick liquid and then I was moved around on a table whilst an x-ray showed how I was swallowing. Once all my tests were done, I just had to wait a little while for my results. After a little while of waiting, I finally received a letter and it said that I have a diagnosis of something called achalasia. This was very confusing and overwhelming as I had never heard of this condition. So stupidly, I didn't think this was going to be a big deal because I had no idea what it even meant. After receiving my letter, I was sent back to the hospital, but this time to see somebody who knew more about this illness and so that I could discuss my treatment options going forward. I went to the appointment and I met the consultant. He explained to me that there was no cure, but there was treatment options that could help ease my symptoms. My options were balloon dilation, HM, POEM or Botox injections. The surgeon told me that the POEM procedure would be the best option and would be better as it wouldn't cause me any scars, as the HM procedure would cause scars due to it being keyhole surgery. So we went for the POEM procedure and a date was set for the surgery to happen. On the day of my surgery, I arrived at the hospital, papers were signed, I was prepped and I was sent down to the operating room. The next thing I remember was waking up in my bed on the ward in agonising pain. I was kept in hospital overnight and my pain just kept increasing. The next day I told the surgeon I was in a lot of pain and that I could taste blood, and he just assured me that this was post-op bleeding. And after my family stressed to the hospital that I was not ready to go home the next day, I was sent home anyway. When I got home, as every day went by, the pain got worse and worse. I felt as though I was drowning every time I forced water down my throat. During this time, I went to the hospital 2 times. They did a quick chest x-ray both times and told me nothing was wrong. Unfortunately, the x-rays did not show what was truly happening to me. Finally, the night came before I was rushed into hospital. I was at my ex-partner's house as he was unhappy staying at my parents' house for over a week. I woke up in agonising pain, screaming out for help, coughing up chunks of old dried up blood, and my ex-partner and his mum just told me to calm down and go back to sleep. So I forced myself to deal with this pain, and finally I passed out from the pain. The next morning I woke up in worse pain, screaming out for help. As I tried to get down the stairs I collapsed, and finally my ex's dad carried me into the car and rushed me to the hospital. When I arrived at the hospital I was put into a chair as I couldn't walk, and within minutes of arriving I began to throw up buckets of blood. The next thing I remember is that I was lifted into a bed and rushed into an emergency room. I remember seeing all the lights on the ceiling and thinking that this is it, the light you see when you die. Once I made it into the emergency bay room, I remember throwing up more buckets of blood, and the staff just stood there watching me. No one did anything. My mum had to keep running for buckets for me to throw up blood into. I remember my mum crying out for someone to help me, and no one did. Finally, a man came into the room and told them to send me for a scan. This was either a CT or an MRI, but I don't know which one. But I do remember being rolled off of my bed onto a table, and then I was put into a huge loud tube, and I was put back onto the emergency bay after the scan was completed. Shortly after, I was given a few blood transfusions after signing some papers, and then the doctor spoke to my dad, and they both came over to me and explained that I would be needing a chest drain. This would be to help drain my lung cavity. The next thing I know is that I was surrounded by the doctors and many students who were watching me. A needle was put into my side to numb the skin, and an incision was made in my side. Then a drain, the thickness of a garden hose pipe, was shoved through my side through the incision that was made in my skin. This was the most painful and traumatic thing that I have ever been through. It felt like an eternity. I screamed and begged for the pain to stop, and having to cope with the students poking in my side as they were all told to feel this. And finally, after what felt like forever, the drain had reached where it needed to be. Blood and liquids came flushing out of my side. Then my side was closed up with a suture wrapped around the drain, and I was left with my parents to be able to rest a little bit before I was sent to the hospital that I originally messed up. The reason that this was all happening is because the surgeon who messed up in the first place, the one who did the poem operation, had left a huge hole in my esophagus after the poem was done, and my lung cavity had filled and it had caused my lung to collapse. I was then put into an ambulance and sent to the hospital. I remember the bucket that was attached to my drain. It overflowed and just went all over the place, so now when I see an ambulance I get PTSD flashbacks still to this day, and I just imagine that blood being everywhere. I finally arrived at the other hospital and I was put onto a ward and given a lot of strong pain relief. For a little while time was a big blur due to the pain meds and being asleep constantly. The next thing I remember is the surgeon who messed up my operation finally came back and showed his face after a few weeks. The surgeon told me that I would be needing a huge operation called a thoracotomy. This meant that my upper back was cut open across half of my upper back and my lung cavity was cleaned out. They tried to manually close the hole that they had left in my esophagus. Unfortunately, they couldn't empty it all, so they had to put 2 more chest drains in, and they had to give me a nasal feeding tube as I was going to be in hospital a lot longer than we hoped. I was also given a nasal tube that helped my body to vomit. During the thoracotomy, my family were took aside into a private room and were warned that my chances were not looking good. They told my family to expect the worst as I had extremely bad sepsis due to the collapsed lung and things weren't looking great. By some kind of miracle, I survived. I was so lucky. Due to the pain meds and PTSD, my memory of every day is a blur. But the next thing I remember is after weeks of slow improvement, I suddenly started to go downhill again rapidly. I was rushed down for an MRI and it showed that I had another infection growing in my side and my back area, so I was sent down to the X-ray department Started by finding the infection via ultrasound. They then numbed my skin and put a really long needle into my side and pushed it into my body. Once they reached the infection, the surgeon slowly started to drain some of the infection out manually. However, he could not do it all as there was too much, so he put a thin drain in called a pigtail drain, and it was left to come out on its own. Reference of size of the infection that I had, I was told it was the size and the shape of a rugby ball. After this, I just carried on with my recovery time. Between all of this, I had to have more blood transfusion. My nasal feeding tube kept blocking due to nurses putting stuff down the tube that just kept blocking it. Just lots of different types of pain relief was given to me. It was just not great. Towards the end of my hospital time, I had my chest drains out, one every so often. This was extremely painful. Luckily, my dad came with me every time I had one took out so that I could squeeze, well, basically crush his hand. I had so much love and support from all of my family. They stayed with me every day, all day, every day. And they took it in turns for one of them to spend the night at the hospital with me so that I could have the help and support through my mental trauma. Once all my drains were removed, the whole of my esophagus was healed, infections were drained, it was finally time for me to be discharged. Discharge papers were signed, my pigtail, drain and nasal tubes were finally removed and took home. I really hope that this was the end of my food nightmare. I was stupid to believe that. So time went by, I slowly started recovering. I had constant pain in my back and chest. I was told that it was permanent nerve damage. Still to this day, I have to use numbing patches when my pain is unbearable. My PTSD symptoms got worse. I'm still waiting for PTSD therapy 6 years later. After all my surgery, I was only able to force very thin wafer chocolate bars and quavers down, sometimes powdered mash. Due to eating full packs of soft chocolate bars and quavers, my body quickly gained weight and held on to it. Within 2 to 3 months of being home, my esophagus quickly closed up again and I couldn't swallow anything. Due to my weight gain, no one believed me again and I was just given aim shake powders and told that it was in my head. After a few years of arguing with the hospital and slowly losing the weight that my body was holding on to, they finally did another set of tests. I had an endoscopy, a manometry and a barium swallow test again. And within a few months I received a phone call with an apology for them not believing me, and I was told that my esophagus had gone back to how it was before my surgery and that I had to go back to the team who messed me up. Obviously I went into a panic attack and refused to see the surgeon who did this to me, and they made sure that it was in my records that he was not allowed to go anywhere near me again. Months went by and I went to meet one of the other doctors from the team and a balloon dilation was arranged. They did this procedure Christmas Eve year 2020. This procedure did absolutely nothing. I was only able to force melted ice cream down very painfully for about 48 hours and then my esophagus just closed back up to how it was before the operation. And again, just like every other time, I wasn't believed. Months went by, I rapidly started losing weight. I went to my final appointment with the gastro team and they finally admitted there was nothing else that they could do and they referred me to a feeding tube specialist. I went to meet the tube specialist. He asked me to go somewhere to get myself weighed weekly and to keep receipts to show how much I was losing weight. And then the next time I saw him, he quickly arranged for me to have a peg tube fitted. A little bit of time went by and I finally got a date. I arrived at the hospital, papers were signed, and I was warned that due to all the internal damage inside my body from the chest drains and the other procedures I had to have, peg fitting may not be safe to do without x-ray, to find a safe place to insert the tube. Unfortunately, the procedure did not go well, it wasn't safe enough, and I was given a nasal feeding tube. A few months went by, the nasal tube was a nightmare, it kept blocking up, and then I began to get more problems. I was sent to a different hospital as my feeding tube had curled up inside my stomach. I was kept in hospital for a few days to about a week. It was about 30 degrees. I had to keep begging them to get me a fan as I kept getting overheated and having seizures. For days I was just put on drips to keep me hydrated and I was ignored. Finally I snapped and told them if no one helps me I'm reporting it to PALS, which is an NHS complaint line, again for the lack of care that I was receiving. Within less than an hour I was told I was going down to theatre for another nasal tube. When I arrived in the operating room I was informed that I was having a peg tube finally fitted with x-ray machines to make sure it was safe. And finally I had a successful operation. My peg feeding tube was finally in. The first few weeks to months were so painful. The healing process was generally awful. My first tube change at home was agonising, but as time has gone by, it has got a lot easier. Living with a feeding tube for the rest of my life comes with a lot of challenges. It gets infected quite easily no matter how much I look after it. Also, I get granulation quite often, and this is very painful. Making sure to remember to change my balloon water in my tube each week can be hard to remember. Also, making sure to take my medical equipment with me in a bag every time I leave the house can be a little bit overwhelming. It's just a lot to remember and a lot to accept. All this trauma to my body, not eating before my tube was fitted, has had other effects on my body. Most people think it's just my swallowing that is a problem, but I struggle with many other things physically and mentally. And I know that unfortunately my Achalasia story will never be over, because you never know what the future holds. But please always remember to be grateful for being here, for having good health, for living your life, even if things aren't going the way that you hoped they would. Life is precious and it can be so easily taken away from you. Do what makes you happy and just live your best life in the happiest way that you can. Thank you so much for watching this video and listening to my Achalasia story. And if you have any questions about this video, please feel free to leave a comment down below, as I may be doing a video answering some questions soon if anybody does leave any questions for me. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, it would really help me out. And I really hope that this video has helped to just spread awareness, even if just to one more person. It will help just to know that somebody else knows what achalasia is and how it can affect somebody and their whole life. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a magical day.